All right, welcome back to the program. My guest, at least my in-studio guest, is with me right here while we await other guests to join us virtually. My guest here is Odion Omofoma. He is the power sector consultant to the Nigerian Governors Forum. Mr. Omofoma, welcome to the program and thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me, Nancy.
Okay, let's get started. During my intro, I did say, of course, on March 17th, the president did sign a couple of constitutional amendments. One of such is the one with the power sector. And a lot of press people took it, journalists took it. I don't know if Nigerians have really internalized the import of what Mr. President did. But let's get started first. What does that alteration really mean? What does that amendment mean?
Okay, thanks. I think a lot of people have spoken about it, but in very simple terms, what the alteration means.
Which people spoke about it? People like you now,
Well,
in your community.
it's been spoken a lot. I think there's been a lot of media hype about this recently. But in very simple terms, what it means is that states can now also distribute electricity in areas that the national grid covers. Previously, the Constitution gave the rights to state House of Assemblies to make laws for electricity generation, transmission, and distribution. But when it came to distribution, it caveated it and put a phrase that says they can't do it where the national grid is already in existence. So what that meant was that states were restricted to being in the distribution market in rural areas or areas that were deemed not covered by the national grid. So with this amendment or alteration of the Constitution, states now have the unfettered right to make laws for electricity within their states that will cover generation, transmission, distribution in areas covered by the national grid and in areas not covered by the national grid as well.
So does this really mean that the entire value chain process has been disrupted? Is this a disruptive amendment in terms of how the sector is okay, before this bill, how the sector was before constituted, in terms of, you know that of course you have the government operating in some parts of the sector, you know that interventions from even the government have gone into the sector, as well as even from the World Bank, for example, and all of that. So how disruptive is this process to the entire value chain?
Well, it depends on how you look at it, and great question, by the way. It could be seen as disruptive, and it could be seen as decentralizing in a positive way the sector. Now, disruptive from the perspective that we had a single electricity market that we ran. Well, some people say we don't have an electricity market, but regardless, we had a market.
I think it's a market, still a market.
It's still a market, no matter how functional it is. We had a single electricity market run by the federal government and managed or regulated by NERC, Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission. We had a single electricity law, an extant law, the Electric Power Sector Reform Act, that obviously gave birth to the regulatory structures and then the commercial structures. We had NEPA that was unbundled to PHCN and then privatized. Now, these were entities controlled at the federal level. Now, what this alteration does is that it then creates a subnational electricity market. 36 subnational electricity markets, in addition to what you already have. Now, that could be seen as disruptive. But I wouldn't look at it as disruptive per se, to the extent that if we get things right first, or if we do the very things that we need to do now, it will not be disruptive. It would actually build on what we have. Just to expatiate, we're now transitioning from a single electricity market to a federal electricity market and subnational electricity markets. That would require a lot of harmonization. A lot of, in fact, we need to rewrite the framework again that we have to make sure that these two markets function effectively. Without doing that, it can be disruptive. If you don't get the steps right, it can be disruptive. The second is that nothing changes for now. The only thing that starts to change is when a state makes the law. Yeah. Without the law, nothing changes. So people are excited. I don't think they should get excited yet. I think they should first wait for the states to make their law. And for the state to make a law, it first has to agree that, look, this is our state electricity policy. this is a framework we want to adopt. These are the energy sources. This is how we want to play in this. And then they make the law and they start to implement the law. If the law is wishy-washy, you may not get the investors and the buying of necessary people. You may not see the improvement in the electricity access to citizens in that state. So there's a process to this, and if we skip a number of the processes, we might end up with maybe perhaps a far worse electricity sector.
Since the amendment came to being, have you gotten interest? Have you seen a glimmer of interest from states so far? I know that some states, of course, we are entering a new dispensation by next month. But have you actually seen interest from even the governors that were re-elected, so to speak, because they will still be the CEOs of their states?
Okay, so the amendments, I think we should first of all give kudos to the Ninth National Assembly. They were great in pushing for the amendment. States.
Okay. I think I need to halt you,
Okay.
Odion. I think we have our guest connected on Zoom now. If I can hear. Okay, on phone now. Okay, we have our guest on phone now. Mr. George Etomi, good morning and thank you for joining us. You were supposed to join us on Zoom, but you know, sometimes when you depend on technology too, it messes up. You know what, my mind came to 2023 elections. I'm not talking about that yet. Mr. Tommy, if you can hear me, good morning to you and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Nancy. I'm glad to be here.
Okay, fantastic. Let me get your view concerning what we're discussing today, the decentralization of power. Odion just gave us a piece of background, but I would really like to hear from you. And let me also ask the question which I asked earlier. How disruptive is this process? You know, during my intro, I said, will this be seen as a significant victory for the sector? What do you think? Is Mr. Tommy there?
Yes, I'm here. I lost you. I lost you briefly, but let me start by saying that what is unfolding is not entirely new. There's always been a legal and regulatory framework for states to share the power space with the federal. And that's why it was on the concurrent legislative list. What has just made the only difference in this particular legislation is that the federal government has said states can now make laws on to cover all three aspects of the value chain within this area already being served by the national grid. Otherwise, states were always empowered to do what they should do. But then, following from habit, don't forget we were under the military when this reform started. So even though the law was on the concurrent list, in practice it was still run like a unitary power system. And that's why some commentators have said we have a power sector, but not or an electricity sector, but not an electricity market. But what this new law or this constitutional amendment will now do is it will enable those states who are willing to create electricity markets to do so without let or hindrance. And if you ask me, is it a welcome development? Yes, it is a welcome development. For those of us who are already playing in the sector, we always had issues with a centrally controlled electricity market, which simply meant that everything we did in the subnational needed to be cleared at the national level, with things like subsidy, issues to do with gas and all that. It meant to become very unwieldy. In a sense, states lost control of their ability to control the market. Now, will this pose challenges? Absolutely yes, because you need to try and go through the miasma of confusion that could come about if there isn't collaboration. For example, some states are already served, some districts serve about 4 states already. how are you going to do that? Because if each state begins to pass their own laws, are those discos now going to be separately registered in those schools? What about the regulation? That could always create, increase the cost of doing business. So those regulatory challenges will come with it. But having said what I've said, the direction in which the market should move is that those states who are ready, willing, and able to control their market should be able to do so. And Lagos is one of them. Edo is probably another one. And I know that Enugu as well. And if you look at what already exists, it makes the case that it can happen. Lagos, for example, in spite of the fact that there are 11 distribution companies serving all 36 states, if you include the federal, the FCT, 7, Lagos alone had 2 discos, Eco Disco and Ikeja Electric. And so that makes the case for the fact that you can actually have states segment the electricity market and begin to make it more robust. There are many states where the national grid does not extend to. We call them generally underserved or, in fact, unserved areas. So the first priority would be for these states to set up their electricity market to meet with the demands from those areas. And this can be done through so many different methods. For example, the major challenge, as I told you, is the grid, the centralized grid, which today carries only about 4,000 megawatts of electricity. Lagos alone can make do with that. In fact, the Eco-Disco territory alone can do with that. But because of the constraint from the grid, that cannot happen. So if you begin to generate power, which can be embedded directly, you can begin to slowly create mini-grid, grid system within states, and they can then wholly control the generation, transmission, and distribution of electricity within their state. Now, what would that do to existing contracts? Because most of these existing discos are already contracted to the national grid. Well, that conversation will have to take place because the role of NERC, the regulator, and that of who the municipal regulator will be when the states are ready, will have to be clearly defined.
Okay.
Today, most grid power is contracted to NBEC, who takes the power and then distributes through vesting contracts to discos. With this new arrangement, NBEC's role will certainly come to a halt, and you will now begin to find situations in which they can actually generate and then give power directly to distribution companies.
Okay.
So it's a welcome development overall, if we can speak overall. If, again, I take Lagos as an example, we know that studies have shown that today, Lagos State privately generated electricity as high as 15,000 megawatts. And yet, from the national grid, combined allocation to Eco, Disco, and Ikeja Disco is under 1,000 megawatts. I mean, that's utterly ridiculous. So it means people are spending phenomenally more to self-generate.
Okay.
But all that could be put behind us if we have a very robust state electricity market, where in some cases, some of these self-generated power can actually form a pool to generate and supply to the existing market.
Okay, Mr. Tommy. Mr. Tommy, if you can hear me now, let's dissect some of the things you've talked about. Because I see Mr. Odion here disagreeing with you, especially when you talked about NBET. And I also like to interrogate further. I like that you brought up the NBET issue. I like that you also did mention the difference in states, because I was coming to that. For example, Lagos, I think, has 2 discos. Yeah. I know that in Benin, some investors are working with the state government, I think, to put up something there. I think is in Plateau too, you have 2, the Jos and is it Nesco or so. So what kind of difference would we see in states? Then the other part which I also want us to talk about is that what will be the stake now for, perhaps I should call them minority shareholders like BPE, that covers whether state government and everybody involved the 40% there and the implications. So, Mr. Don, why were you,
No,
so that's it.
it's
And guys, if we have that slide, the proposed national electricity power sector framework, let's put it on the screen now so that we can take it from there too. So
okay.
go ahead.
I agree with most of what Mr. Itomi said. The challenge, or where I disagree, is the impact of this on existing contracts.
Okay.
Again, we currently have a single market run by the central government, and that market flows through from generators to transmission companies to distribution companies, and then you have embed being the a bulk trader, you have the market operator and all that. That structure still remains, because what the constitution alteration just did was to allow states unfettered access to also do the same thing that the federal government is doing, but at subnational level. So those contracts will still be existing, as in the discos will still have to buy power from the national grid, maybe from embed. TCM will still need to wheel the power from Kainji to somewhere else, or through other third-party IPPs to the end users. The addition to this whole mix is now states saying, okay, we can also license Odion Disco in one small area of Edo State or half of Edo State, or license Nancy Disco in Enugu State to also provide electricity in addition to what Enugu Disco is doing. Now, where it gets a bit, where the regulatory risk sort of then starts to really come up is who at the end of the day has regulatory oversight over distribution sector. If you look at the Constitution very well, the National Assembly has the powers to make laws for electricity generation and transmission. It never mentioned distribution within the Federation. Right? The only place it mentioned distribution was between border towns and boundary communities, partly in Nigeria, partly outside. That's where it gave the National Assembly the powers to. Whereas at Section 14 of that same constitution gave the State House of Assemblies the right to make laws across the entire sectors. And with this proviso, states can also make laws for areas covered by the national grid, right? So then the question then, what then begs the question is, who regulates the distribution sector? So that's the disruption in all of this.
Yes, exactly, which was why I asked the question earlier. What also happens to NEC? And I don't know, Mr. Tomi, are you still with us there? And do you agree with your colleague over here in Abuja? I hope you're still with us. And guys, let's take the slide on the proposed national electric power sector framework, please. Yes, go ahead, Mr. Tomi.
Yeah, yes. What I meant with NBET going away, but NBET was always supposed to be a temporary arrangement because the major distortion in the power industry has always been subsidies. And that's because you do not have cost-reflective tariffs. So what has happened is that NBET has been created as that what's supposed to be a temporary interventionist body to buy power through PPAs from the generating companies and then vest these two vesting contracts on the discos. And then they're supposed revenues coming from the discos are then supposed to go to offset this. But usually, because the cost is not reflected, what has happened is that there's a gap. And it's that gap that NBET working with the government should make up and pay back the discos. The GENCOs. But as we've seen, the intervention has not been very efficient. And today, most GENCOs are complaining that they're being owed. They, in turn, contract with the gas suppliers. Let's not forget one thing. 70% of the cost of electricity from the thermal plant is actually the gas input. And the gas companies are themselves saying that gas is not cost reflective. And that attempt to bridge the difference has not worked as well. So what you find in the industry is that gas is supplied to GENCO on a best endeavor basis. It's not actually contractually based, which means the day they feel like they need the gas elsewhere, they will take it elsewhere. And that's why from time to time, you have these frequent collapses because they're simply not obligated to give the gas. Now, we're hoping that with this new law, and a totally different dynamic can be introduced in which the states themselves can also go and see whether they can source for gas. And in speaking, I use Edo as an example, the Oshomo plant. The Oshomo project gives hope that a state can actually work in partnership with the private sector, source its gas, used for its generation, work with the existing disco, and begin to expand the electricity market. So where I'm heading to is that there's a lot to unbundle as the new environment unfolds. But collaboration is the key. And why is it important to collaborate? It is important because the funding requirement for the power sector is huge. The money is not even in Nigeria. So whatever you do, you must create a legal and regulatory environment that encourages investors. Because when these tender seekers come, they want to be sure that you have a clear and ambiguous regulatory framework. They can put their money in and then they can expect to get it out. So if we do not deal with some of the issues that will pose challenges in this transition, it could actually be a deterrent to investment. But do we need more players in the market? Absolutely, yes, we do. Monopoly has generally not been the best when it comes to competition. Where competition also enables you to get at the best. We've seen that in different sectors, banking, telecommunications. So we could do the same with electricity. And we dream of a market where the consumer will actually be seen and decide, today I want to stay on with the coal, tomorrow I'm able to seamlessly switch to better electric and so forth and so on. So there is skin in the game, and we are looking forward to a great evolution in the electricity market.
Okay, Mr. Tommy, let me stick with you with this question before I come back to Dion here. Is it not just also beyond constitutional amendment and the laws? Because we're talking about viability now. We're talking about transparency in sense in regards for the state. We're talking of viability, talking of transparency, talking of even transparency or enforcement of law. Why I'm asking you is because of what you mentioned earlier in terms of business or in terms of investment are coming to the states. The question also would be, why were the states not also involved in this, in the process where national grid was not available? Why were they not even generating power? Now the FG has said, okay, guys, you can do anything you like. Isn't it beyond constitutional amendment and law? It's about now presenting business and a profitable business case that would even bring investors into their states. Because I don't think the states can even do this with their revenue from FAC, as it were. Yes, if they try it, they're in trouble.
You're absolutely right, man.
Okay.
You're right, man.
Okay.
What has happened with the electricity market before, as I told you, was that following military rule, everything was centralized. So even though the law enables states to participate if they wanted to, the structure didn't allow it. So I agree with you, beyond constitutional amendment. The appetite for change is there. We saw Lagos State take advantage. People frequently refer to the Enron experiment and erroneously think that Enron didn't work. Enron worked in the sense that when it came, it contracted for the 15 years to supply power to the national grid and leave itself out. So that showed that it's possible for states to participate if they wanted to. But the structure didn't allow it. Everything was centrally driven, and even when they then finally unbundled NEPA into PHCN and subsequently privatized, that model just remained and stayed in place. And some states have actually been battling to have a say and that they could help. And so what has essentially happened, like you put it correctly, is that, okay, the federal government is saying, okay, go ahead, do what you want to do. Now, beyond this, you have to look at the commercial imperative.
Exactly.
The money required for power is in the hundreds of billions of dollars. If you look at an indication, the development goals tell you that you actually need an average of 1,000 megawatts per 1 million of your population. So we're really looking, if we want to be playing this game, at close to 200,000 megawatts in Nigeria. But we're discussing 4 now. South Africa, with a population of about 50 million, are doing around about 45,000 megawatts, which is averagely close to what it should be. So we've not even scratched the surface. Now, if this arrangement will lead to some sort of increment, we can move from 4 now to 10 to 15 to 20 to 45. And that can rapidly be achieved if you get states to participate. But there's one caveat. Not all states can afford it. It's very important. And those states who cannot afford it will still rely heavily on the national grid. So the national grid is not going away. Let me be clear about that.
It's not
But
going away.
those states who can get a mix of what the grid can provide, do their own internal generation, and meet the demands of their own population will be most welcome to do so.
Okay, Mr. Tommy, you just got that out of my mouth because I was coming to Odio now to say, will this mean a gradual exit of the national grid? But it seems that both of you agree. So I should keep that question to myself right now. The question also right now is, okay, the question to you, Mr. Dion, would be, will buoyant investors come in now? Especially as we take a look at the implications of the privatization. I know that okay, even the generators too. It's like the whole sector is plagued with loans. And loans from banks, interventions from government. There's also the World Bank part of it. Is it the Power Sector Recovery Program or so? So how does all this work? And which states do you think would even take this advantage as a result of perhaps the signal that we've seen in time past?
Okay, I think in terms of sizing investor appetite for this, I think there's a healthy investor appetite for this.
Are you?
Oh yes, there's.
Show me where.
Let me break it down for you. So let's use Edo State, where Osioma is the primary investor there. There are a number of parties there. Let's use the off-grid market where people are doing mini grids and co.
Yeah.
They're not connected to the national grid, even though they are sort of supported. Let's use the various IPPs that you see in Lagos scattered all over the place, trying to sell power to clustered communities. That will tell you that there's a market, there's an appetite. What has not just happened is that tie back from generation to the end customer within the state for private investors who are not licensed by NERC. Now, when private investors know that they can be licensed at state levels, they can build generation behind your backyard and give your estate power. All you require is 24-hour power, but there is no such license because everybody has to run to Abuja to get a license. Somebody in Abuja has to sit down on their file and determine all manner of criteria, whether you have light or not. A very good example is in Eko Disco, and I'm sure Mr. Itomi will know this. There's a power plant line somewhere in Lekki Phase 1. I think it's a 9 megawatt power plant. At some point, that power plant tried to contract with third parties to sell power. It never did because Eko said that was his network. So under this framework, you're going to have that power plant say, do you know what? I will go get a license from Lagos State to build a distribution franchise, and I will sell power to these people. And automatically, people in that Lekki Phase 1 in the, estates will say, okay, I can either stay with the national grid, which is connect to Eco, or I switch over and connect. Exactly the same thing is happening in Jos. Nesco is the oldest utility company in this country. It was founded in 1923. It is still producing power from a 15 megawatt hydro source somewhere in Plateau, just supplies a certain portion of Jos. And if you go there, their network is so clean. Beside it is JEDC's network, and you will see the difference. And people in Plateau that are lucky to have that are lucky to live within the franchise area of NESCO, they all want to connect to NESCO. People pay a lot to connect to NESCO because it is quite clean. We have similar thing in Aba Power, where Enugu Disco is sort of ceded the area to Aba Power. But on a good day, both of them could have run together. Edo, the same thing. So there's enough investor appetite. What has been the dislocation is the fact that an investor would generate and is unable to distribute. But I won't even encourage that an investor owns the entire value chain.
Because I was
I will not
coming to
even,
that.
I will not even, I will not even, that will not be the model.
Can we see synergy and relationship?
Yes, that will not even be the model. The critical thing that this amendment unlocks is access to electricity for the end user. So guess what? There are a number of structures that can now be developed. So for instance, let's look at this structure that we have on the screen.
Okay.
And it talks about the existing federal electricity market and then the state electricity market. The one thing green is what you have today. Nothing changes other than the fact that NEC may have to cede certain regulations to state electricity regulatory bodies. The ones in blue are what the
states
is what this alteration
would mean
brings out. First of all, states can now create laws that will create the legal and regulatory environment. Effectively, there will be state electricity regulatory commissions. Now, what will the state electricity regulatory commissions regulate? And we sort of try to highlight it there. When I mean off-grid GENCOs, I mean GENCOs that are not connected to the national grid, that operate wholly within the states. Think about it, captive generation, embedded generation. They provide power within the state. I think those should fall within the regulatory purview of states. They would regulate successor discos. In terms of the intrastate operations, so Lagos is lucky, they've got 2 discos they may have to regulate, but Edo State, Benin Disco covers 4 states. So Edo State, when it makes its law, I would expect that they will try and, as much as possible, to regulate some of the activities of BEDC. I don't know about economic regulation, but things like customer service. If I don't have quality power, do I run to Abuja to complain, or I go to Edo State to complain?
What's coming to my mind also right now is how the discos currently structured would operate. I try to relate it with what we're seeing now in the financial system, like a holdco kind of structure.
Perfect.
You know, because when I was like, okay, will the discos be operating that kind of holdco structure where you see what's happening right now with the banks, and some people are crying foul against it, even the operators, but will that begin to happen here?
Yeah, so I anticipate that discos, successor discos that cover more than one state, effectively the rest of the discos minus the Lagos discos will operate in a holdco format, assuming states now decide to also regulate their operations, right? Because they operate interstate. Interstate operations, whatever law that Edo makes for electricity regulations cannot bind BEDC when it comes to Delta State. Delta State may have to go make its own law. So you find out that a disco will automatically be regulated by 4 entities. So clearly you then need to have like a holdco structure, which obviously that will speak to NERC. That's where NERC will continue to regulate. That's where BP as a shareholder and other minority shareholders will have their stakes. And then they would open subsidiary companies at state level. Now this is curing the mistake that privatization did not cure, or rather that was made during the design of privatization.
So that means we are coming back to
no,
the
we
basics,
didn't come back. We're coming back to the basics. Because PHCN was, well, discos were sold based on the carve out of PHCN regional areas. Typically, you should have carved them out as under states, but they carved, PHN had 11 regions, so they carved them out and put 2 in Lagos. Now we're now coming back to that original structure, which is each state have your own utility, have your own electricity distribution entity. And I see that happening. But again, it also depends on how quickly some states can adopt it. Like I said, and luckily the Senate also has in its electricity bill 2022, they made provisions that where states are unable to make their own laws, then the national grid NERC still continues to regulate until such a time the state then decides that, okay, I've come of age, I now want to control my destiny, I will regulate. But again, let me be very clear, it does not take away the national grid. The national grid still remains, and I would expect that the collaboration that Mr. Tommy talked about would be the collaboration between the national grid and the state grids or state electricity markets, because without that collaboration, it will be chaos.
Okay, Mr. Tommy, let me come back to you now, because the ABC and the XYZ, or the grammar of all what we're speaking here, to an average Nigerian woman, will this solve the availability problem? Metering issues, billing issues. I guess that's what an average Nigerian will be thinking about now. So I want you to comment on that. Also, in addition to perhaps the states that we think may just be going ahead, because I think Ondo State as well as Edo and is it Ondo, Edo and Lagos have electricity laws, so to speak. So how does all this how does all this play out? It's really going to be an interesting few years from now. I don't want to, because okay, go ahead, Mr. Tommy. So many things to talk about.
I mentioned is that whether it's state, whether it's federal, whether it's private, public, no matter how it goes on, the fundamentals are the same. For thermal plants, your feedstock is gas. You must ensure that there is gas to fire your plant. Otherwise, the cost to self-generate will be very expensive. Now, in Lagos, for example, some IPPs were actually licensed by NEC to work within the Lagos territory. They had to source for their own gas. It was a bit more expensive, and they worked with us. Let me say, initially, the relationship was antagonistic. They had captive market in Lagos State, and then they took some other people. But when that cost became too expensive, they needed a bigger market. And we worked, like in the spirit of collaboration, we work with them. But what we're seeing today is that they are increasingly unable to meet even their primary obligation. So they're falling back on us to assist them. That will continue to happen, and that's why, yes, I said collaboration is so key. And the reason that is happening is because gas to power infrastructure, gas for domestic use, needs to be addressed. That gas for export, LNG, is cool. And that's why the federal government makes a lot of money and dividends from LNG. But gas for domestic use, the policy is still faltering. So you can build humongous generating plants. If you do not have the feedstock to give them, you will be in big trouble. And that's why I said investors will be looking very closely at how this whole thing will unfold before they commit the several billions of dollars that are required to take advantage of it. Now, the hydro is a different ballgame. It's slightly cheaper. In fact, it's the cheapest source today of power that's going into the national grid. But to have a tariff balance, vehicles are not allowed to source all their power from hydro. So you still need to go and add a mix of hydro and thermal to get some kind of tariff that would not scare consumers away. Now, going to the future, let's not forget the role renewables will play. There's so much talk about solar because the government is very heavy on solar. And even those of us in the disco business are beginning to look at expanding our power base. So there are investors, I agree with Odion that there's appetite. There are investors who are looking a lot at renewables because there's funding internationally for renewables. But how all those will play out will be determined by how this whole collaborative process takes place. But what is clear is that we need more power in Nigeria. It holds the key to the diversification foundation of this economy. And as we move into an era in which you are going to be taking away subsidies, the one area we must concentrate to ensure that the economy rests upon is the availability of steady and clean power, steady, reliable, and clean power.
Okay, Mr. Tommy.
If you do that, you will crank industries back into life.
Okay.
Domestic users will have a choice, and critically, people will be happy.
Okay.
Happiness quotient is people's.
Okay, Mr. Tommy, if you can hear me, we're gradually coming to the end of the show, and I think I have about a minute to end this program. But, Mr. Odion, from what Mr. Tommy has said and your question I asked earlier, from also what you've mentioned, does this now determine who the end user is? Because at the end of it, I think is in Akwa Ibom, for example, Ibom Power generates, gives. Your Akwa Ibom citizens don't even get access to the power.
The end user remains the end user. The question is who now serves the end user. Will the end user still be served by PHDC or new entities licensed by the state? But before we do, I think we've gone ahead of ourselves. I think the constitution has been made. We now need to make the laws or amend the laws. First of all, there's the laws by the National Assembly that needs to now reflect that states can do this. Then states then need to go on their own and make their own laws as well. Without these two, we are still at status quo. So I think the first step is let's focus on the National Assembly to make the right law as in amend the existing Electricity Act or pass what the Senate, amend it to reflect what the Constitution says, and then we devolve down to the states for the states to make laws. But before we even do that, we then have to come up with a right framework that the both markets will coexist. If we do that, I think we'll see the effect that we all desire.
What is the timeline that we're looking at it? Because for me, even from my own analysis, it's not a short-term thing.
Timeline, the first step to do is to make to amend the EPSRA. That has to happen now. If it enters the next assembly, that will take another 4 years. Because you have new people and here. So I'll plead with the National Assembly or the National Assembly, please work very hard to pass whatever amendments or before you leave, so that we do not start the process all over again, and that will take forever.
Okay, I want to say many thanks to both of you. I wish this program cannot end today. We may likely do another part. Mr. Tommy, so sorry, Zoom did not, work as we wanted. So we would definitely do another edition because there are so many issues that we've not even talked about. Thank you very much, Mr. Dian, for coming.
Thank you for having me.
And also, Mr. Tommy, thank you very much. George Tommy is the chairman, West Power and Gas. He joined us via the phone, while Odion Omofoma is the power sector consultant of the Nigerian Governors Forum. We've been talking about the amendment. You just need to, take a look more at this because it may likely affect us in years to come. That's the show today. Be the best you can be the change that you want to see. I am Nancy Naji. Bye now.